Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle drift through the softly flickering corridors of forgotten time. Tonight, we step away from the thunderous battlegrounds and royal courts to enter a quieter world dimly lit by flickering candles, the scent of beeswax lingering in the air, heavy with the tang of ancient manuscripts and iron. As you allow your breathing to slow, and the weight of the day begins to dissolve, we shall travel to the hushed workshops and cloisters of medieval Europe where men in long robes hunched over stained parchments and bubbling glass vessels, where strange symbols whispered of transmutation, immortality, and divine truths hidden in matter itself. This is the world of medieval alchemy, a discipline often mocked as pseudoscience, yet rich with mystery and meaning, steeped in secrecy and obsession, and never quite what it seems. Not merely a misguided science, alchemy was a fusion of chemistry, mysticism, philosophy, and spiritual transformation. Tonight, we will not simply observe its theories or its failures. Instead, we will meander through the rhythms of alchemists' daily lives, meet the obscure minds who devoted themselves to the great work, peer into the quiet chambers of symbolic thought and forgotten aspirations, and uncover the darker truths that linger just beneath the gilded promise of gold. So settle into your pillow, let your eyes grow heavy, and your thoughts grow quiet. Our journey begins now. Imagine yourself in a modest stone building, nestled at the edge of a medieval town. The walls are cool and damp, lined with shelves of oddly shaped vessels, bone-dry herbs, crushed minerals, and powders stored in small ceramic jars each, one labelled in a mixture of Latin, Greek, and esoteric symbols, some almost indecipherable. It is early morning. A faint chill clings to the air as the first rays of sun pierce the soot-darkened windows. The alchemist, perhaps in his late 40s, moves slowly. His woolen robe, stained at the cuffs with ink and ash, sways gently as he tends to the small furnace known as an athenorit's embers, carefully stoked and kept at a precise temperature. The fire must be constant, yet never violent. The transformation of base matter is a slow, contemplative process. He measures sulfur and mercury with a deliberate hand, not the quicksilver you might imagine dripping like magic, but rather a symbol of transformation. Sulfur for the soul, mercury for the spirit, salt for the body. Together, these three were thought to be the essential principles of all matter. When combined in proper harmony, they held the potential to unlock the philosopher's stony and elusive substance that could turn lead into gold or grant eternal life. His tools are simple: mortars and pestles, alembics and retorts, crucibles of fired clay. They are not standardized. Most are homemade or passed down from another practitioner. The alchemist's hands, calloused from years of grinding, stirring, and heating, move with a careful rhythm. He murmurs under his breath not incantations, but observations. Notes are scrawled in a journal, written in a cipher that only he or his closest apprentice might understand. Outside the laboratory, life is altogether different. Townspeople gossip, unaware, perhaps deliberately indifferent to the solitary figure hunched over bubbling brews. To most, alchemists are curious beings, skirting the edge of science and sorcery. Some suspect them of heresy. Others visit in secret, hoping to buy a tincture that might restore vigor or soothe a lingering illness. Food is plain. Often the alchemist survives on bread, broth, and dried fruit. Meals are taken irregularly, dictated not by appetite but by the phases of a process known only to him: coagulation, calcination, sublimation. Days pass unnoticed. Nights blur into mornings. The smell of burning herbs and metallic dust permeates his quarters. The air is always faintly warm, always faintly dry. Sometimes, when a rare ingredient arrives as antimony from Venice, cinnabar from the Easter, flicker of hope returns to his weary expression. For all the mysticism, alchemy is not a glamorous art. It is patient, lonely work, requiring long stretches of waiting, of tending fires and distilling solutions, of endless recording and decoding. Time itself begins to bend around. The processum alchemists reported dreaming in symbols, seeing the process unfold behind their eyelids. And yet, despite the hardship, there is a quiet nobility to their persistence. To wake each morning and believe, truly believe, that with the right combination of elements, one might touch the divine. This is the core of the alchemist's heart. From these muted rituals of daily labor, we begin to understand that alchemy, was not simply a precursor to chemistry. It was a way of life, a devotion, an act of faith. It shaped not only the matter in their flasks, but the very fabric of their inner worlds. As we move forward, let us now leave this quiet laboratory and step into the shadowed biographies of those who dedicated their lives, sometimes at great cost, to the hidden arts. Among the many who trod the winding, often fruitless path of alchemy, a few names endure, though even these are wrapped in layers of myth and mystery. Their biographies are often part truth, part invention, and wholly fascinating in their quiet peculiarities. These were not conquerors or kings, but men who measured their success in ounces and symbols, not in lands or blood. Let us begin with Nicolas Flamel, name you may recognize more from legend than from history. A 14th century French scribe, Flamel lived a seemingly ordinary life in Paris, running a bookshop with his wife, Perenelle. He was not a nobleman nor a monk, but a man of letters, steeped in the written word. It is said that one day, Flamel came upon a mysterious manuscript, covered in strange symbols and ancient Hebrew script. He spent decades decoding its secrets. According to the legends that bloomed after his death, Flamel succeeded where others had failed. He was rumored to have discovered the elusive Philosopher's Stone, and so the tales say transformed mercury into gold. More seductively, some whispered he had discovered the elixir of life, and faked his death to live forever. His modest tomb, still standing in Paris, has been the subject of quiet speculation for centuries. There is, however, no evidence he practiced alchemy at all. Most of the stories arose centuries after his death, but in the still corners of history his name lingers, suspended between scribe and sorcerer. Another figure emerges from darker corners, Paracelsus, born Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim in 1493. His name, like his work, was expansive and difficult to contain. Paracelsus was a physician, alchemist, and philosopher who rejected much of the medical orthodoxy of his time. He wandered across Europe with little more than a sword and a flask, declaring that the true path to understanding disease and matter lay not in ancient authorities, but in direct observation and divine insight. He infused alchemy with new meaning. For Paracelsus, it was not merely about gold or eternal youth. It was about transformation, in every sense, the purification of body, mind, and soul. He advocated the use of minerals and chemicals in medicine, laying foundations that would eventually shape pharmacology. His writings are strange, vivid, and dense, sometimes seemingly incoherent, other times shockingly prescient. He died relatively young, his grave nestled in the quiet of Salzburg. Some say he was murdered for his beliefs. Others say his body simply gave out after a life of relentless wandering. His legacy, like so many alchemists, was a blend of science, mysticism, and rebellion. Then there was George Ripley, an English canon of Bridlington Priory in the 15th century. His alchemical texts, such as the Compound of Alchemy, were cloaked in metaphor and illustrated with bizarre and beautiful images: lions devouring the sun, birds emerging from fire. These were not literal instructions but spiritual guides, rich in allegory. Ripley believed that true alchemy required not just a mastery of matter, but a deep moral and spiritual purification. He claimed that the ultimate goal of alchemy was not wealth, but enlightenment. His writings were influential enough that centuries later, the likes of Isaac Newton would pore over them in the dead of night, seeking hidden truths among the metaphors. And yet, the lives of alchemists were not always so poetic. Many suffered greatly for their work. Some were accused of fraud, others of heresy. Giordano Bruno, though not strictly an alchemist, walked similar intellectual path, sexploring infinity, the multiplicity of worlds, and the unity of nature. He was burned at the stake in 1600 for beliefs deemed dangerous. The line between alchemist and charlatan was perilously thin. Some, desperate for patronage, staged spectacles of transformation using sleight of hand. Others were genuine seekers, imprisoned for failure or for success, depending on who had paid for the experiment. To dabble in alchemy was to court suspicion. To succeed, truly succeed, was to become a threat to the natural and divine order. Yet through all of this, the alchemist endured. A quiet figure hunched over a manuscript or a flame, muttering prayers and formulae, dreaming of a world where base things might be transformed into something luminous, incorruptible, and pure. As we continue, let us leave these haunted biographies behind, and descend into even deeper mystery. Beneath the surface of written treatises and noble aims lie buried texts, hidden relics, and the coded language of a culture that resisted the passing of time. If you were to stumble upon an alchemical manuscript in a dusty library, perhaps in the forgotten wing of an abbey, or tucked away in the private archive of a noble house, you might be struck not by what it says, but by how it conceals. For alchemy was never meant to be plain. Its truths, or what were believed to be truths, were deliberately hidden beneath layers of allegory, metaphor, and image. It was not simply a practice, but a secret language, a culture designed to veil itself. Manuscripts often began with cryptic titles like Mutus Liber, the silent book, which contains no words at all, only a sequence of intricate, surreal illustrations. There are images of robed figures working in silence, serpents devouring their own tails, crowned eagles, men lying beside dying lions. What do they mean? The answer depends on who is looking and how deeply they choose to see. Even more literal texts were veiled behind what alchemists called decknomen, or cover names. Simple terms like salt, king, or dragon rarely meant what they appeared to. Salt might represent the fixed nature of matter, or a stage of purification. King could refer to gold, or a stage of enlightenment. The dragon was often a stand-in for the primal, chaotic matter that must be tamed. These metaphors were not decorative, they were essential. To an outsider, the work would seem nonsensical. To an initiate, it was a roadmap. This coded world extended into the architecture and physical spaces of alchemy. Consider the Ripley scrolls, large hand-painted parchment scrolls filled with vivid allegorical illustrations. There are only a handful in existence, their origins uncertain, their meanings endlessly debated. These were not just texts, they were visual puzzles, meditative aids meant to be contemplated as one would a religious icon. In 2006, archaeologists discovered a hidden laboratory beneath the floor of a mansion in Provence, belonging to Emperor Rudolf II, a known patron of alchemists. The lab was a time capsule, stained crucibles, half-finished retorts, and containers bearing the alchemical signs for mercury and sulfur. The walls were blackened with soot, as if abandoned in haste, or perhaps secrecy. This was not a display, it was a place of real work, of fire and fumes, of silence and solitude. Further east, in the ruins of monasteries from Poland to Romania, fragments of alchemical writings have been found scrawled in margins, scribbled between prayers. Often, these were copied over time and passed by hand, changing slightly with each new transcription. Some scholars believe entire treatises were written in ciphered verse, designed only to be understood by those who already grasped the deeper principles. Even the most famous texts, such as the Emerald Tablet, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, are so brief and cryptic that they seem to invite confusion. Its most quoted line is above, so below is not an instruction but a meditation, suggesting that what happens in the heavens echoes on earth, and vice versa. This principle would guide centuries of alchemists in their belief that matter and spirit mirrored one another. Yet, as much as alchemy cloaked itself in mystery, it also invited seekers. These puzzles, these silent riddles, offered a path. To decipher them was not just an intellectual exercise, but a transformative act. In understanding the symbols, the alchemist hoped to transform themselves not just metals, but the soul. And this, perhaps, is where alchemy parts most sharply from modern science. It was not only concerned with what could be proven or repeated, but with what could be revealed through personal insight. The work was physical, yes, but it was also deeply spiritual, philosophical, almost devotional. As we step away from these silent pages and ash-filled chambers, let us ascend again, this time into the halls of the powerful. For alchemy was not confined to the lonely or the poor. It drew the attention of emperors, popes, and kings each, hoping that behind the coded language and strange symbols lay real, tangible power. While many imagine the alchemist as a solitary figure in a dim and smoky room, hunched over vessels of curious bubbling liquids, this was only part of the story. Alchemy, for all its veiled secrecy and spiritual undercurrents, did not exist apart from the world of power. It was deeply entwined with it. And as we drift gently into this next chapter, we find that kings, emperors, and even popes turned their eyes toward the elusive promises whispered by the alchemical arts. In courts across Europe, Alchemists were sometimes welcomed not as eccentrics but as prized guests. They offered not just the allure of transmuting metals into gold, but a mystiquean aura of ancient wisdom and forbidden knowledge. To rulers facing financial strain or political uncertainty, the Philosopher's Stone was more than myth. It was a potential solution, a miracle. One such ruler was Emperor Rudolf II of the Holy Roman Empire, who reigned during the late 16th century. He turned his Prague court into a magnet for thinkers, mystics, and alchemists from across Europe. His castle became a strange confluence of science and sorcery, filled with scholars poring over celestial charts, cryptic manuscripts, and ornate glass vessels. Rudolf's fascination bordered on obsession, believed that alchemy could reveal the secrets of creation itself. But beneath the intellectual curiosity lay political desperation. His empire was strained, and the promise of alchemical gold was deeply tempting. In England, Queen Elizabeth I extended her cautious favour to John Dee, a man who straddled the line between scientist and mystic. Dee was a mathematician, astrologer, and alchemist who claimed to converse with angels through a medium named Edward Kelly. Though his work eventually veered into the more occult, Dee advised Elizabeth on matters of navigation and imperial strategy. His home in Mortlake housed one of the most extensive libraries in England, not just in science, but in alchemical texts. He dreamed of a unification of divine knowledge and earthly power, of empire built not by sword, but by enlightened vision. Even the Vatican seat of rational theology and organized faith was not immune. Pope John XXII 2012 issued a bull in the 14th century, condemning fraudulent alchemists, yet paradoxically, later popes employed alchemical practitioners under discreet titles. Gold created through alchemical means was occasionally accepted into church coffers, albeit with quiet scrutiny. And yet, for every alchemist who found favour, there were others who fell from grace. Michael Sendivogius, a Polish alchemist of great repute, once enjoyed the support of powerful patrons, but was also imprisoned when his work failed to deliver expected miracles. Sendivogius claimed to have discovered the food of life, a mysterious essence present in air, a notion curiously aligned with our modern understanding of oxygen. But in his day, the line between visionary and liar was razor thin. Patrons could be generous, but they were also dangerous. A failed experiment might be seen not as an honest misstep, but as evidence of deceit or sorcery. Alchemists were often kept under close watch, their movements restricted, their work expected to yield results. Some were confined to court laboratories, denied contact with the outside world. Others disappeared entirely. It is here that we see the shadow behind alchemy's golden promise. Beneath the soft glow of its metaphors and aspirations lay a hard truth: the pressure to deliver, to transform base metals into wealth, to heal incurable ills, to defy nature itself. The more alchemy promised, the more it was hunted, manipulated, and feared. And still, it endured. For the elite, alchemy was never just about gold. It was about legitimacy, control, and perhaps a touch of the divine. To possess such knowledge was to flirt with the power of creation itself. And in a world where crowns were contested and fortunes unstable, that power was irresistible. As we now step away from gilded courts and royal intrigues, let us return once more to the quietus persesto, the heart of alchemy, not as ambition or politics, but as belief. In the next segment, we will explore the spiritual essence of alchemy, its mirror to the soul, its promises of inner transformation, and its lingering echoes in our own philosophical yearnings. Let us now draw the curtains and dim the lights once more, stepping away from emperors and popes, from laboratories laced with soot and suspicion. We now enter a more delicate space, quieter, more inward, for beyond the clamour for gold and acclaim, there was another purpose behind alchemy, one that glowed like an ember in the chest of its truest practitioners: the transformation of the soul. You see, for many medieval alchemists, the physical process of transmutation from lead to gold was merely a metaphor. The true work, the magnum opus, was an inner one. They believed that just as base metals could be purified through fire, dissolution, and recombination, so too could the human spirit be refined. This was not science as we know it, but rather a sacred artan echo of ancient Hermeticism and early Christian mysticism. The stages of the alchemical process nigrido, albedo, citrinitas, and rubidoche corresponded not just to chemical changes, but to spiritual phases. Nigredo, or blackening, was the dark night of the soul, a stage of dissolution, where the ego is broken down and confronted with its shadow. It was uncomfortable, necessary. The alchemists saw this not as failure, but as the first step toward purity. Albedo, the whitening, symbolized purification. The soul, having faced its chaos, begins to reorient toward light. It is a stage of humility and clarity, often associated with water and cleansing. Citrinitas, the yellowing, was sometimes omitted in later texts, but originally referred to the dawning of inner enlightenment, the first true sight of the divine within. The mind is not yet fully transformed, but it begins to shine with new insight. Rubedo, the reddening, represented completion, not a return to the old self, but the emergence of something entirely new. Gold, metaphorically and spiritually, the soul aligned with the eternal, the divine spark realized. Alchemical texts are filled with references to these stages, not only in chemical terms, but through elaborate allegory. A king and queen might unite in a chemical wedding, symbolizing the balance of masculine and feminine forces within the psyche. A lion might devour the sun, only to be reborn as a winged phoenix. These were not literal creatures, but aspects of the human condition, depicted in surreal imagery, so the meaning would strike not just the mind, but the imagination. The practice of alchemy was, in this sense, not unlike monastic devotion. Silence, solitude, fasting, and meditation were often part of the alchemist's routinano, out of superstition, but to refine the self in harmony with the work. The furnace, always burning, was as much within the heart as it was beneath the crucible. Some alchemists aligned their work with Christian mysticism. They saw Christ himself as a symbol of divine transformation, his death and resurrection, the ultimate rubedo. Others drew from older sources, especially the Hermetic writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, who declared that man is a great miracle. The belief was that hidden within each person was a fragment of divine essence, waiting to be released. This is why so much of alchemical writing is indirect, elusive. The secrets cannot be tautly experienced. They are veiled not to deceive, but to protect. For those unready to face their own transformation might misuse or misunderstand the power within. And so the alchemist labored, often alone, through both literal and symbolic fire, hoping not only to change matter, but to become something more than what he was, to transcend the pettiness of the world, to refine the base elements of his own being, and if he was fortunate to leave behind something luminous, something incorruptible. As you rest now, perhaps you can sense the quiet gravity of this path, a journey not toward riches or fame, but toward something gentler, more enduring, toward harmony. Now, as our thoughts settle deeper into this stillness, let us turn to another element of the alchemical tradition, its symbols. The strange looping signs scratched into old parchment. What did they mean? Why were they drawn? And how do they still linger in our collective imagination, centuries after their fires have gone cold? Drift now, if you will, through a quiet scriptorium lit by the amber hush of oil lamps. Before you lies a worn manuscript, its vellum pages curled at the corners. Faint lines of ink trace, symbols that seem at once familiar and utterly strange. A circle bisected by a line, a triangle nestled within a square, a serpent biting its own tail. These are the symbols of alchemites' true language, drawn not in speech, but in shape. The alchemists, ever cautious and ever poetic, relied on this pictorial language to encode their knowledge. These were not random doodles or decorations, but dense vessels of meaning. Each symbol encapsulated a process, a substance, a principle, or even a sacred truth. They were signs not just to read, but to contemplate. Take the Ouroboros, for instance, the snake devouring its own tail. It is among the oldest symbols in alchemy, a perfect loop representing eternity, the unity of all things, and the cyclical nature of transformation. In the alchemical process, it marked the never-ending cycle of creation and destruction, a visual metaphor for balance and self-sufficiency. Or, consider the symbol for gold, a perfect circle with a dot at its center. Simple, elegant, and profound. It represents the sun, the most refined metal, and spiritual perfection. In the alchemist's cosmology, gold was not just a metal, it was the divine made manifest in matter. Mercury, drawn as a crescent perched atop a circle and cross, was considered the spirit of fluidity and transformation. It was the intermediary between the earthly and the divine, unstable and elusive. It stood for mind, for breath, and for the process of change itself. Then there is sulfur, the soul, often symbolized by a triangle atop a crossfire above matter. It represented passion, combustion, and sometimes even the dangers of unchecked desire. These symbols were deeply tied to the 7 planetary metal siege, associated with a celestial body, a day of the week, and a stage of spiritual evolution. Lead with Saturn, tin with Jupiter, iron with Mars, gold with the Sun, copper with Venus, mercury with, well, Mercury, and silver, luminous and changeable, with the Moon. To the alchemist, these correlations were not arbitrary. They reflected the harmony of a cosmos in which everything had meaning. The macrocosm of the heavens echoed in the microcosm of the laboratory. The stars influenced matter, the soul mirrored the sun, and the body could be reshaped just as the base elements could. This symbolic system extended even into colors and animals. The black crow marked the stage of Nigrodothe descent into darkness. The white dove, albedo purification and light. The red lion and green dragon symbolized stages of transformation, often violent in nature, but necessary for rebirth. What's more, these signs weren't just theoretical. Alchemists painted them into their manuscripts, etched them into tools, carved them into the walls of hidden laboratories. They were used to conceal, but also to guide. An initiate might spend decades decoding their meaning, each realization a step along the path toward enlightenment. Some of these symbols remain with us today. The modern symbols for male and female stem from the alchemical signs for Mars and Venus. The plus sign, plus, used now in mathematics, once denoted coagulation, combination, and fusion. Even the pharmacy symbol, the serpent twined around a staff, echoes the caduceus of Hermes Trismegistus, the mythical founder of alchemy. And so, through these loops, lines, and dots, the alchemist whispered across time, not with noise, but with meaning. These symbols invited contemplation, not conclusion. Their purpose was not just to record a process, but to invite the viewer into a relationship with transformation itself. As your thoughts gently drift through these curious glyphs, imagine the slow, deliberate motion of the hand that inscribed them. Each mark, made with care, not only to record but to reveal. Now, let us leave these symbols, still glowing quietly on parchment, and turn to the darker echoes of this ancient art, the fears and persecutions that followed it, the moral questions it raised, and the long, slow journey that led to its decline. As softly as a fog descends upon a field, so too did suspicion begin to settle over the world of alchemy. For centuries, it had existed in a curious limbo, respected by some, ridiculed by others, but largely permitted to persist in its obscure corners. Yet in time, the slow-turning wheel of history shifted, and the shadows around alchemy grew longer, heavier. By the late Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, the boundaries between science, heresy, and fraud became dangerously blurred. The very secrecy that once protected alchemists now served to isolate them. In a world increasingly shaped by institutions, be they ecclesiastical, royal, or academic, the solitary figure of the alchemist began to appear not as a sage, but as a threat. One of the central fears was deception. Some alchemists, either out of desperation or hubris, claimed success they had not truly achieved. Tales abound of tricksters who used sleight of hand to make lead appear to become gold, or who offered potions promising impossible cures. These pretenders, known as puffers, in the vernacular gave alchemy a disreputable sheen. Their failures and frauds cast suspicion even on the sincere. Then there was the church. While certain alchemical pursuits were tolerated, especially those framed within spiritual or medicinal ghost authors, drew sharp condemnation. The bull Spondent Parita, issued by Pope John the 2012 in 1317, denounced alchemists who forged gold and silver, labeling their acts criminal and heretical. It was not so much the science that troubled the church, but the perceived overreach, the human attempt to play divine, to reshape God's creation by unnatural means. In many regions, the penalty for such acts could be severe. Alchemists were fined, imprisoned, or, in darker cases, executed not necessarily for the practice itself, but for the deception it was thought to encourage. or the spiritual rebellion it was feared to represent. One somber tale tells of an alchemist imprisoned beneath the Bastille in France, locked away not because of his failure, but his supposed success. His ability to produce gold was considered too dangerous to be permitted in freedom. In this reversal of fate, the very dream of the alchemist became his prison. As universities emerged and the scientific method gained dominance, alchemy began to lose its footing. Scholars such as Robert Boyle, often considered the father of modern chemistry, experimented with transmutation but emphasized observation, measurement, and reproducibility over mysticism. The shift was subtle but profound. The laboratory remained, but the spiritual dimension faded. By the Enlightenment, alchemy was largely seen as a relic and embarrassment from the age of superstition. Its ornate symbols and poetic texts were replaced with formulas and equations. Fire gave way to precision. The soul was no longer part of the experiment. Yet, even as alchemy declined as a practice, it did not entirely disappear. Its language lingered in secret societies and esoteric traditions. The Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and other mystic orders adopted its symbols and philosophies, weaving them into new spiritual frameworks. In some circles, the alchemist was not a failed scientist, but a misunderstood prophet. And today, we find ourselves in a curious position. The skepticism of the modern mind dismisses alchemy as misguided, yet our fascination with it endures. It lives on in literature, in art, in whispered metaphors. We still speak of alchemy when something is magically transformed, when the mundane becomes extraordinary. Perhaps then the alchemist has not vanished. He simply walks more quietly now, his fire dimmed but never quite extinguished. As we near the end of our journey, let us turn at last to the final resting places of these once hopeful seekers. What became of them? What legacy did they lever not in gold, but in thought, in art, in spirit? Let us visit the echoes of their work in the world we know today. And so we arrive gently at the final chamber of this long and winding corridor. The fires of the alchemists' furnaces have cooled. Their glass retorts lie shattered or buried. Their names, once whispered in court and chapel alike, have faded from the tongues of the living, and yet somehow the spirit of alchemy endures. Not in gold, nor in gilded manuscripts, but in subtler, quieter ways. In the modern world, we rarely speak of transmuting metals. Yet the idea of transformation, of changing one thing into another, of refining and elevating what is base remains deeply embedded in our culture. Consider the language we use. We speak of alchemy in cooking, in love, in art. When an ordinary moment becomes something meaningful, something golden, we call it alchemical. This enduring metaphorical power is no accident. Alchemy, in its essence, was never just about substances. It was about potential. It was about becoming. And in a world still searching for meaning amidst machinery and measurement, that quiet dream continues to resonate. Even in science, the influence of alchemy lingers like the faintest perfume on parchment. The very foundations of modern chemistry and pharmacology were laid, however unknowingly, by the alchemists' hands. Distillation, crystallization, solution, and precipitation. These were techniques refined over centuries by those who sought not just to understand nature, but to perfect it. Isaac Newton, one of the most revered scientists in history, devoted more time to alchemy than to mathematics or optics. In his private papers, long sealed and often misunderstood, he explored the works of alchemists, not dismissing them, but studying them with serious curiosity. He, like others, believed that truth was not confined to one path alone. In psychology, too, the echo resounds. Carl Jung, the 20th century thinker and pioneer of analytical psychology, saw in alchemy a symbolic map of the unconscious. He believed that the alchemical stages mirrored the stages of personal development, that the journey from nigredo to rubedo was not chemical, but psychological, a path toward individuation, toward becoming whole. And then there is literature. From Goethe's Faust to modern fantasy novels, the figure of the alchemist remains. Ever mysterious, ever seeking, often flawed, yet filled with yearning, the desire to know, to refine, to redeem. Even the visual symbols of alchemy continue to enchant. They are etched into tarot decks, jewelry, architecture, and even corporate logos. They suggest something ancient, sacred, and secrete a knowledge lost, or waiting to be found. But perhaps the most profound legacy of alchemy is its vision of harmony, a belief that matter, spirit, and self were not separate realms, but deeply intertwined, that the transformation of lead into gold was only meaningful if it mirrored a transformation within. That knowledge, to be true, must be lived, not just known. Tonight, as we reflect on this long and gentle journey, we do not mourn the loss of alchemy. Rather, we recognize it as a thread woven into our collective story. Not a failure, but a foundation. Not a superstition, but a symbol. The alchemists may no longer tend their flames, but the questions they posed still glow within us. Can we transform? Can we refine? Can we become more than what we are? In this quiet space, perhaps the answer is not far off. And now, we slowly close the lid upon the ancient alembic, the gentle hiss of cooling metal fading into silence. You have travelled far, not through miles, but through centuries, through symbols and secrets and soft shadows of thought. We began in the solitude of the alchemist's workshop, moved through the veiled lives of seekers and mystics, and passed among kings and codices, symbols and persecutions. And here, at the end, we find not gold, but understanding. Alchemy was never truly about riches. It was about the long, patient work of changing what is heavy into what is light, what is common into what is rare, what is broken into what might, just possibly, be whole. So, as you rest now, breathing slowly in the quiet of your own space, perhaps you carry with you a trace of that spirit, the belief that even the most ordinary elements of life may contain something extraordinary, waiting to emerge. Good night, dear traveller of forgotten time. May your dreams be gentle, and your thoughts transformed.